Now, I don't know about you, but the Emerald Nightmare raid seems like an age ago, which I guess it was given that it was released almost 2 years ago, back in September 2016. However, one boss that is constantly getting attention is that handsome creature Il'gynoth, the 5th boss of the Nightmare raid and voicer of a fair few prophecies that have had the community abuzz for well over a couple of years. Many of them have come to be seen as having a few different connotations. For example, her heart is a crater and we have filled it has been overwhelmingly considered to reference Sargeras' sword, but it has also been linked to both Sylvanas and Jaina. Equally, the King of Diamonds has been made a pawn, could reference Magni or maybe even Gallywix at a push. Basically, Il'gynoth's comments have been a joy and a headache for lore fans everywhere, prompting all manner of discussion about their possible interpretations. One particular prophecy that has been getting a bit more attention than community, however, is this.
5 keys to open our way. 5 torches to light our path.
And it's this one I want to focus on. Now, as the expansion was playing out, a lot of players consider this to be a clear reference to the 5 pillars of creation, which totally fits the bill. 1, there's 5 of them, which helps a lot. 2, they play a pivotal role in the War of the Ancients, preventing the Second Legion portal opening in the Temple of Elune, and later in sealing that same portal at the Tomb of Sargeras in Legion. And 3, they kind of ultimately lead us to the Pantheon, which the Void managed to kind of sneak into thanks to that Shadow Priest you don't ever remember inviting into the raid. But despite all of that, a few comments on Reddit in light of recent events have suggested that this might in fact reference something else entirely, and that is the 5 world trees on Azeroth. And I want to use this video to focus on why I think that could be the case and why it's so relevant given the recent and upcoming events in World of Warcraft. Now, since Classic, we've come across world trees in different locations. We've got Nordrassil, the world tree situated in Mount Hyjal. We've got Andrassil, now known as Vordrassil, which is the fallen world tree situated in Grizzly Hills in Northrend. We have Shaladrassil, which we know is the corrupted world tree found in Val'sharah on the Broken Isles. We have an unnamed world tree in which we find Il'gynoth in the Emerald Nightmare. And of course Teldrassil, which has looked better in recent years. In fact, it's Sylvanas torching Teldrassil in such a literal sense that has a few players making the link to Il'gynoth's words. Could this act be one that lights the way in the manner Il'gynoth is suggesting? Well, let's find out together. But first, I want to spend just a few minutes quickly recapping the history behind the world trees themselves. Now, we know in Azeroth's ancient history that the old gods fell to Azeroth and they wreaked havoc for a while. The Titans then came to Order Azeroth, went to town on them, and eventually imprisoned them. Now, sometime after that, once the Titans had cleared the place up a bit, they set the Keepers to work in maintaining and sustaining the world. And one key character in all of that was the Titan Keeper Freya, who was sent out to populate the world with organic life. To do so, she created the Emerald Dream, an ethereal plane that acted as a mirror image of Azeroth, serving to control the evolutionary path of plant life and exist as a type of surreal paradise for the otherworldly beings that live there. It was kind of Snow White's ideal getaway. Now, in Chronicles, it suggests that it's unclear as to whether Freya truly created the Emerald Dream out of nothing, or whether it always existed in some kind of form. It calls it a dream born of Azeroth's slumbering world soul. Crucially though, it's also written that Freya did intend to use this realm as a way to commune with the nascent Azeroth, and I think both of these are major points that we'll come back to. One of the first things Freya created in the Emerald Dream was Gehanir, the mother tree and great bough in which the wild god Eviana resided. Gehanir then became a home for all the spirits of the creatures and beasts that flourished and then passed away in Azeroth. It also became a source of healing and balance in the dream, one that extended beyond the dream into the physical world and illustrates how the Emerald Dream and the real world can affect one another. Now, I'm going to rush ahead a bit here. Gehanir was destroyed in the War of the Ancients when Eviana died. Basically, their spirits had become so intertwined over time that the death of one led to the death of the other. After that war was won, however, the Night Elves and Dragon Aspects took a seed from Gehanir and used it to birth Nordrassil on Mount Hyjal. In addition, Ysera, as aspects of life, bound Nordrassil and the Night Elf Druids to the dream itself, establishing that key connection and, as we'll go on to explain, also creating a potential weakness. Now, when Nordrassil was all but destroyed in the battle for Mount Hyjal, the tree lost the blessing that Norse Dormu had given it, which meant the Night Elves lost their immortality. So, in an attempt to bring it back, the Archdruid Fandral Staghelm created Teldrassil. Now, that plan didn't work, but it did create a world tree, which I guess is something. Andrasil, another world tree, was created sometime later and in a similar way to Teldrassil. Fandral grew it in Grizzly Hills using a branch taken from Nordrassil in fact. This was done to fight the spread of Saronite, the blood of Yogg-Saron in Northrend, and it worked for a bit. However, as it was doing just that, its roots touched the prison of Yogg-Saron in Ulduar, which allowed the old god to corrupt the world tree and drive the creatures around it mad. Now, because the tree had not been blessed by the aspects, unlike Nordrassil and to an extent Teldrassil, the Cenarian Circle realised that they had to destroy the world tree, renaming it Vordrassil or Broken Crown. However, unbeknownst to them, both Yogg-Saron and N'Zoth had used this opening to corrupt the tree even further, planting the seeds of corruption across the Emerald Dream. And it's this that led to the creation of the Emerald Nightmare, and this is a key point for us, and I'll come back to it in just a minute. Finally, there's Shaladdrassil, which we came across in Val'sharah on the Broken Isles. It's an already corrupted world tree, and as we play through Val'sharah's story, we discover how this corruption has come from the Emerald Nightmare. However, it seems that after the War of the Ancients, many of the surviving satyrs were rounded up and placed beneath its roots in an eternal sleep, which certainly didn't help the situation, and likely would have weakened it to the effects of the nightmare. Now, the unnamed one I'm going to have to fudge a bit, basically because we don't know much about it, but we do know that Malfurion, when he discovers the tree in the nightmare, calls it a world tree by name, as opposed to a great tree, for example. So just bear with me on this one. All that matters is that it's clearly a corrupted world tree within the Emerald Nightmare, which homes Il'gynoth, the character behind this whole series of prophecies. So the world trees have their roots, pun intended, deep in the heart of Warcraft's lore. Even more so, Blizzard has clearly taken inspiration from Norse mythology when it comes to that lore. References to Odin and the characters we meet in Stormheim are one clear and recent example, and the world trees are no exception. In fact, the names of each of the world trees ultimately points back to Yggdrasil, the Norse world tree that connects each of the 9 worlds of Norse mythology. Now, Blizzard doesn't seem to have a literal copy of Yggdrasil in Warcraft. Gehenna is probably as close as they get, but rather they spread out much of Yggdrasil's lore and story across all of the world trees in Azeroth. For example, in 13th century literature about Yggdrasil, it is said that the gods assemble there every day. We know from Chronicle Volume 1 that Mount Hyjal, the eventual site of Nordrassil, served a similar purpose for the entities of the Emerald Dream in Azeroth's early history. Like many of the world trees, Yggdrasil is also said to be exceptionally tall, its crown reaching far above the clouds. And perhaps most crucially, Yggdrasil is said to have 3 roots, which extend to a series of wells much like how Nordrassil sits above the Well of Eternity. One of these roots, in fact, is said to have been gnawed on by the dragon Nidhogger, a role that Yogg-Saron mimics in respects to Andrassil, and whose name clearly echoes that of the Norse dragon. So, Norse mythology is kind of a big thing for Warcraft lore, and it offers us a few further interpretations of what's currently happening in Azeroth and what it might mean for the future. One particular piece of Norse mythology I think we need to consider when looking at Warcraft's current events is Ragnarok, the cataclysmic battle between the gods which will usher in a series of natural disasters and lead to the eventual submersion of the entire world in water. Interestingly, the word Ragnarok has 2 phrasings in early literature, Ragnarok, which means fate of the gods, and Ragnaroka, which means twilight of the gods. Now, some of you may be instantly making a link to a rather big event in Cataclysm, which was the Hour of Twilight, in which we were confronted with the final end of Azeroth as Deathwing, by then a pawn of the old gods, sought to usher in the death of all life in our world. We get a horrifying glimpse of this in the end time instance, which echoes not just how Ragnarok is a final battle of gods, played out by the dragon aspects in Warcraft, but also how it is ushered in by an inferno that covers the world, represented by Sutra in Norse mythology and Deathwing in Azeroth's. Side note, you may have noticed that Sutra sounds close to the word Sut, and in Old Norse it means black, lending further links to Deathwing's role given he is the black dragon aspect. Now, despite Deathwing's clear role in trying to usher in the end time, we actually find from Murazon, the leader of the Infinite Dragonflight and Nozdormu's slightly sexier doppelganger, that his vision is not actually the true end time. He says, "I've witnessed the true end time. This is a blessing you simply cannot comprehend." So, when will Azeroth's version of Ragnarok actually happen? Well, in the short story The Blank Scroll, it hints at such a fate should Garrosh have succeeded in taking over Azeroth with his true horde. Stormwind fell, the Orcs reigned supreme, for a time. The Dark Portal, left unguarded, was reclaimed by the Burning Legion. Horrors rose from the sea and found no champions left to stop them. Azeroth's mountains burned and melted, its oceans boiled until nothing remained, and all was dark. A pretty clear reference to a Ragnarok-like event. Alternatively, the Pale Orcs of Draenor heard the same prophecy from the Void Lords themselves, and this implies that the true end time is when the Void comes to consume all reality. And I guess that could be right if we ever get to that Old Man Anduin comic that they'll totally never retcon later in the story. However, I think the true end time, the true twilight for Azeroth, is being ushered in right now, and I feel Il'gynoth says as much himself. One of the crucial parts of Ragnarok is that it is not a linear event, it represents a cycle. At the end, the lands rise back up from the seas and new life is given a chance to repopulate the earth. It effectively represents a circle of life as such, moving from life to death back to life again. And what does Il'gynoth say in our encounter with him in the Emerald Nightmare?
Your coming was foretold in the rings. The long circle is nearly complete.
Similarly, Shadow Priests will know that their weapon, Xal'atath, can occasionally whisper this interesting phrase to them.
This trifling skirmish is little more than a distraction. The true battle draws nigh as the circle nears completion.
I think the circle mentioned in both are actually references to the prophecy of the end time, and the signal that Azeroth's true twilight of the gods draws near, returning us to the era of suffering that was the Black Empire, and moving us towards the end of all life on Azeroth. Now, I've spoken for a fair bit about world trees and Norse mythology, and all of this applies however you interpret a lot of the prophecies coming from Il'gynoth, Xal'atath, and a few other mad prophets we've run into. But you're probably asking, Britza, how does any of this link to the recent events in World of Warcraft and Il'gynoth's prophecy about keys, torches, and lighting a path? Well, as I address that very question and bring this all together, I want to also bring in Ogmot's Dream Journal and just a few lines from it that really stand out to me. They're on the very last page where he gets a revelation from his masters by sacrificing a fellow Twilight Hammer cultist. Roused by her screams, stirred by the whispers, a blessing comes from the masters. Now Ogmot understands. A door, a path. Ours, ours. I think this matches perfectly to Il'gynoth's comment, 5 keys to open our way, 5 torches to light our path. The keys unlock the door and the torches similarly in both light the path. So where do the world trees come in? Well, basically, I believe the world trees are referenced in both parts. Remember, Yogg-Saron and N'Zoth used Andrasil as a key to get into the Emerald Dream. In that sense, each other world tree can also be seen as a key, and it just happens that they only had to let themselves in one door, and now they're kind of heading towards the others from the inside. Yet, with Teldrassil, Shaldrassil and Nordrassil, we found all number of cultists, satyrs and other miserable folk trying to get at them, and I very much doubt they wouldn't try to use them as methods to attack the Emerald Dream if they had the chance. Obviously though, we pushed back the Nightmare during that first Legion raid tier, but we also know something was left behind, a remnant of the Void. This small flower is the door I think Ogmot may have been referring to, and Xal'atath actually suggests this too by saying,
Almost completely gone, as if it never existed. But the rift is deep and vast, and somewhere down there it stirs. Something has changed. The last prison weakens. We must prepare.
Hidden inconspicuously in a cave within a supposedly safe area of the Emerald Dream lies a small but direct connection to N'Zoth's prison, and that means N'Zoth also has a door to the Dream and what lies beyond it. But what might N'Zoth be trying to get at, I hear you ask? I think it's Azeroth's world soul. Now, remember a few minutes ago when I said, now in Chronicles it suggests that it's unclear as to whether Freya truly created the Emerald Dream out of nothing, or whether it always existed in some kind of form. It calls it a dream born of Azeroth's slumbering world soul. Crucially though, it's also written that Freya did intend to use this realm as a way to commune with the nascent Azeroth, and I think both of these are major points that we'll come back to. I think that connection is why we see so many nightmares afflicting Azeroth in the Whispers of a Frightened World scenario. Again, another reference to Ogmot's revelation. I believe the Emerald Nightmare has succeeded in completely twisting Azeroth's slumbering dream, and having this remnant means that there is still an active route, again a door if you will, to Azeroth for N'Zoth. I think this is also what is referred to when Il'gynoth gives that famous line, "Her heart is a crater and we have filled it." Now, if you look at some of the other comments he makes, such as "The Lord of Ravens will turn the key," and "At the hour of her third death she will usher in our coming," you can see that Il'gynoth has a pretty good grasp of the future tense. So why then would he use the present and past tense in his comments about the heart to refer to the Sword of Sargeras, which hadn't even happened by this point in the expansion? I think the Void and N'Zoth have filled Azeroth's slumbering world soul with nightmares by afflicting the Emerald Dream, or at least that's what it may be partly referring to. That's because alternatively, the Dream isn't the only path to Azeroth's world soul. We've seen in expansions such as Wrath of the Lich King and novels such as Dawn of the Aspects that old god blood is everywhere. In fact, in the prologue of Dawn, Thrall and Deathwing face off against one another in a cavern surrounded with old god blood when Deathwing comments to him, "The blood of the old gods does not answer to your whims, for they are not of this world, only the chosen hold true sway over it." Furthermore, just prior to this encounter, when Thrall is spiritually searching through Azeroth, he notices something. What gave him the most pause was immense caverns, cold and unnatural, scattered throughout the globe. They were pockets of lifelessness that even the earth elementals were hesitant to approach. Basically, there's old god blood all over the place, not just in Northrend. However, that does make me wonder if the world trees all play a similar role to the one that Andrasil did, albeit unknown to the druids and any other factions, by containing the spread of old god blood and the corruption in Azeroth's earth. If so, their destruction one by one would explain why Il'gynoth also references how this corruption may be growing unabated by saying,
"From the earth he draws strength. Our earth, our strength."
The spread of their blood has allowed the old gods to literally take possession of the earth, a bit like a small dog with a bladder problem. And obviously having Azerite, the blood of Azeroth herself, displaced as it is in battle for Azeroth, isn't going to help in the slightest. Now, as a bit of a side note, I think it's really interesting that one of the potential drops from Xavius in Darkheart Thicket is a fire artifact relic specifically called the Torch of Teldrassil. Now, this could be a mere coincidence, I'll put my hands up and say that, but I think it at least adds credence to the idea that their destruction, the destruction of all world trees, do serve as torches for Xavius, Il'gynoth and the rest of N'Zoth's cronies, lighting that physical and spiritual path we've been mentioning. Whatever the case, could it be that the destruction of the world trees, and that includes Teldrassil recently, is allowing the old gods to have more and more dominion over the physical world of Azeroth? And if so, what effect is this having on N'Zoth? To look at that last question ever so briefly, I'm going to throw in one last bit of Norse mythology for you to back me up. Let's say N'Zoth is in fact feeding off the blood of his fellow old gods scattered around Azeroth, and that's what is giving him more and more strength. In that sense, he kind of reminds me of an Ouroboros, which is the ancient symbol of a serpent that feeds off of itself, representing the infinite cycle of nature's endless creation and destruction, life and death. And there's one Norse character who is a perfect example of that, Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent who, according to Norse myth, is currently residing and waiting beneath the oceans. Jormungandr has in fact grown so large that he can wrap round the earth and thereby consume his own tail. But most importantly of all, when he eventually releases his own tail and rises to the surface, he is the one who will usher in Ragnarok. And does that remind you of anyone? Yeah, I can't think of anyone either, but I'm sure it will come to us eventually, probably in patch 8.3. So I've covered a lot in this video and I want to thank you for bearing with me on it. Hopefully what I've been able to show you is how the world trees and their inspiration in Norse mythology give us a really unique glimpse into some of these prophetic visions that we keep seeing in Azeroth's story. Now, of course, I could be totally wrong. Blizzard can literally take the story wherever they want, but I feel these insights at least allow us to predict where Blizzard might be going without straying far from the lore and mythologies that have made up the backbone of WoW since its origins. Either way, I think we're in for a big event when N'Zoth finally shows himself. For one, there are two really cool quotes from Xal'atath that point to how cataclysmic his arrival should be.
This land has seen so much upheaval. The cataclysm, the sundering, the scouring. You really have no idea.
Now, the Scouring is believed to reference the fall of the Black Empire by the Titan-forged armies of the Pantheon, and all three of these events have brought a different aspect of Ragnarok with them, whether it's the scorching of the earth, the sinking of 80% of the landmass of Azeroth, or a cataclysmic battle between gods in its ancient past. What would a similar event do to Azeroth, I wonder? Xalatath also comments that this is where all the conflict between the old gods has been heading all this time, by saying,
It is ironic that the weakest of us may be the ultimate victor. Cthulhu, Yogg-Saron, Y'Shaarj, and... well, only one would remain to consume the world that was always meant to be.
It seems, as in Highlander, there can be only one old god, and we're about to see what that plan was supposed to look like when it was formed all those millennia ago. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be back soon with an analysis of the relatively recent Sylvanas Warbringer video, and why I think that apocalyptic imagery can offer us new interpretations of her character and that of a few others. Until then, take care.
Xavius, running from one master to the next, scrambling for power, yet defeated again and again. The god of the deep picks a poor champion. Or is there something else at play?